Welcome to this week's edition of Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. This week, Connecticut made history by enacting one of the toughest gun control laws in the nation. We've talked about it many times on this program. In fact, about 2 months ago, we had two of our guests that we have here today who were just starting out on the committees that were looking into this, and now we have the product. Let me introduce them or reintroduce them from 2 months ago. We have State Senator Tony Boucher, 26th District. She represents Bethel, New Canaan, Reading, Ridgefield, Weston, Westport, Wilton, and she's a Republican, and her committee was school safety. And Representative Dan Carter is 2nd District, Bethel, Danbury, Newtown, Reading, and you were on the Gun Violence Committee. Let me start with that one because that's the one that's gotten the biggest focus, and primarily because there are so many people who are opposed to it, including you. You didn't vote for that.
I did not vote for it. No, at the end of the day, I looked at the actual bill and what it would do, and I decided it wasn't really what was in the best interest of my constituency or the state, for that matter.
But can you elaborate on that? Because it certainly does a lot of things.
There are a lot of good, solid things in this bill. There's no question about it with respect to the gun part. In fact, some of my own ideas that I had introduced in bills somehow found their way into this major bill, which was a good thing. And that is doing the eligibility certificates for long guns. Having that kind of permitting process allows us to do background checks on all sales. And I think that's what we have always wanted, is universal background checks. So some of those concepts that are in the bill are very, very good, solid concepts. Increasing the storage requirements in the sense that if there's somebody in the home who would not otherwise be eligible to get a permit of any kind, then that person has to have a different kind of storage requirement, probably mandating a gun safe. Now, on the other side, it didn't go far enough on some of those types of things. Like, I would have had more gun safe opportunities, on more storage requirements, because I believe that we need to regulate firearms pretty strictly. Where they lost to me was actually on the bans. The fact that the AR-15 and that kind of gun that was used has really been characterized as a really horrible weapon when other weapons function exactly like it. So I think we need to be talking less about the kind of weapon and more about the regulations that we have in place for the people who are going to responsibly own them. I probably would have gone with the magazines, but as you know, these all get put in one big bill. So at the end of the day, I felt that personally, and with the feedback I had from my constituency, which by the way is different than Senator Boucher. At the end of the day, I felt that this was the way I had to go.
But just to put it in perspective, there are two other Republican representatives from the Newtown area who did vote for it.
Yes.
Same constituency as you. Let me let you weigh in, and then we'll come back.
Well, actually, not entirely the same. Remember, I represent Bethel, Danbury, Reading, and Newtown's a very small part of my constituency. Right. But they're very different views.
There's been a lot of talk that it was difficult for lawmakers who were in the southeastern part of northeastern part of the state, rather, which is more rural, more hunting goes on, and so it was tougher for those lawmakers to commit to this legislation. Yes, clearly you're not up in that part of the state.
Well, believe it or not, I do represent the vast majority of Bethel and Ridgefield, and as you said, another 5 other towns.
But not the wilds of Connecticut, the quiet corner.
Not as rural. That's true. And I will say this: with their 36 Senate districts, this district, the 26th district, they're all the same size, but yet we had 20,000 more votes cast, which means it's the most politically active of all, and they all weighed in. In fact, our office was barraged by thousands of emails and calls.
Votes cast?
In other words, more people got out to vote.
For office?
Yes, in fact, we had the highest vote count of any state Senate district. That means that they're more politically active, so we hear from them more than any others. And in fact, the busloads of individuals that came up to Hartford came essentially from 4 of my 7 towns. So they had strong views. And that being said, they weighed in, and I would say the majority weighed in for stricter gun controls than not. However, both were extremely active and both had good points. You know, it was quite an amazing process. The first time ever that a true bipartisan process and committee was put together. And I was asked to chair the school security committee, school safety and security. And I have to tell you, it was really quite a big responsibility, and I took it very seriously. When a parent sends their child to school, they expect them to be safe. This rocked everyone. It was devastating in what occurred. It was the worst nightmare of a parent, of a school system, of a nation, quite frankly. So this process was unique. It didn't have to be a bipartisan process. The majority of the House and Senate, a vast majority, in fact 2/3 in most cases, is one party, the party of the governor. But yet they reached out and they wanted to be even. And so I took this responsibility very seriously. We had a number of meetings and public hearings. We had 222 people write us testimonies, another 100 that came in person. We analyzed the situation as well as the proposals from each of the stakeholders: teachers unions, superintendents, principals, the Department of Education, the Police Chiefs Association, small towns, large towns, security chiefs from every area. And so what I think we had was a great product at the end of the day, with a great deal of responsibility to weigh in. And once you are invited to be a part of that process and to be relevant, I think it behooved us to be supportive, and as well as support the majority of the residents in my district that felt very strongly about going forward with this. Now, it's not perfect, and remember, whatever was done can be changed in just the very next session.
I have to cut you off. We have to take a break. And you voted for this
I did.
legislation, so we have two different sides, both the same party. Let's talk a little bit about the pressures you felt in doing this right after this break. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut, talking about the pressures. It got so bad this week, ironically, because we know there were some questions about the mental stability of Adam Lanza, the shooter, and there's some question about whether autism played a role. There was an autism event at the Capitol, and the governor couldn't go to it because his safety officials felt it was just not the best, because there were people in the Capitol, because of this legislation, who were very angry. Is that your experience of when people were reaching out to you with their opinions?
Yeah, I mean, I would say both sides of the issue felt angry, felt like their rights were at stake, whether it was the right to safety in their community or the right to bear arms and protect their country. Everybody was angry and everybody was upset about it. But I think the problem that I have seen as this has developed is this rift between gun owners and non-gun owners. That's going to be the real problem that we have to deal with in the state. Because through this, even that comment, the fact that the governor couldn't go because he felt like he was unsafe, all the folks there who are gun owners and who were, like, I would say, there to show support for their side are good people. They're not whack jobs. They're not people who I think are going to be breaking the law or going after the governor. But because they are the gun owner and they have a weapon, they've been characterized that through this debate. So I've been getting a lot of angry people on both sides of the issue all through it. Now, I've also met with fantastic people. I mean, I would say the March for Change people, especially out of Reading, have been phenomenal. I mean, they've been really nice to me and honest, and we've had great debates. The gun owners have been nice, and there's some on the fringe who are, shaking their fist at you and yelling and screaming on both ends. So there's been a lot of pressure on both sides of the issue.
No question. And I'm used to threats because I tend to be outspoken on very controversial issues. In fact, one particular issue some years ago, I actually had an armed guard that followed me around so I could testify. But this is what you sign up for. If you don't have the courage to represent fairly, then you shouldn't be in that job, quite frankly. And yes, I've had personally individuals that would like to make sure that you never get reelected again. And that sentiment is on both sides. But as was just stated, that's the fringe side. The vast majority do appreciate the hard work you put into it. There are some that feel that some Republicans have sold them out on this issue. And in fact, they were at the table and invited to be at the table so that things could change in what was originally proposed. What was originally proposed was actually the publishing the names of gun owners, outright bans completely, confiscation of what they had already, and imposing taxes on ammunition. The the limited number of firearms they can purchase. Now, what I would have liked to have seen was a little bit more movement on the ban of magazines from 10 to maybe 17, because that is some commonly used firearms, and that could be revisited in the future. However, by having the Republicans there, they prevented a lot of that, as well as they got something that they had wanted, we have wanted for a long time, and that is the elimination of the early release program that has not worked well and has put dangerous criminals.
You say there are things you would like to have seen in this bill that aren't there, yet you voted for it. You say there are things that you would like to, what didn't go far enough, you didn't vote for it. What's the difference?
Well, it's I think some of it's the personal part of it. I mean, we all make a call based on how our constituencies are reacting. Obviously, I feel like there's a lot of people, even in Newtown, who weren't for this, people who felt like they couldn't speak out. I also have very personal convictions. I mean, I've been in the Air Force most of my adult life, whether it's active duty reserves. I have very strong feelings about the Constitution and responsibility. That it's kind of like an old flight guy I used to be with. He said, treat people like adults, they act like adults. The people that we've been passing the laws for really aren't the criminal until somebody steals their stuff, or until somebody is like, the mother who was involved in this incident, who made some terrible mistakes and actually crimes with what she's done. And I think that's where our focus needs to be, because since the debate focused all around banning and confiscation, and what I would say the extreme part of the debate, we missed the middle ground, the stuff that would actually do something really important. And even though there were good ideas in this bill, I looked at it and I said, this at the end of the day isn't going to prevent something like that from happening.
And in my case, I do respect the fact that Connecticut has a strong constitution that guarantees the rights for someone to defend themselves in their home and even the state. However, it also has an obligation to regulate as well and to oversee the possession and use of firearms to some degree. And I think that can be adjudicated by the courts if you overreach and go too far. And there are other sessions. As well as I had a responsibility. I was asked to chair a very important committee on school safety. We did a fantastic job. The proposals, by and large, all made it into this bill. There were proposals for mental health improvements, some insurance. That did not go far enough. As far as I'm concerned, that is the heart of the problem we are facing. And the state has shirked some responsibility that they have to address in the future to really deal with that and, in fact, reopen some of the institutions they've closed.
Talk about the future. We're going to take a break. And in the future, when we come back, I'll mention the courts getting involved. Let's talk about not what you were referring to, but the very fact of this bill facing some serious opposition in the courts. Do it in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. So much to talk about. There's so many subjects here that mean so much to so many people in Connecticut. Reintroducing my guest, Dan Carter, is a state representative from the 2nd District, and State Senator Tony Boucher represents the 26th. I expect that the briefs are being written as we speak, the opposition. Will it be basically on the Constitution?
What I'm hearing so far, I mean, I've had obviously the fact that I voted against it. There are a lot of people, from that side reaching out to me. And what's been happening recently is they've talked about filing the briefs. They've talked about things already been in the works. Most of it sounds like it's about the Constitution. I received something, and I didn't have a chance to read it, an email talking about what the case would look like. And most of it seems to be based on similar cases to Heller. Maybe that they're overreaching because this was what they say is an ordinary, lawfully owned, kind of weapon. The other part of it, though, is we have attorneys even in our own caucuses, and this becomes a judgment call. Attorneys look at this and they say, there in the debate, there are some who think this will withstand constitutional challenges. I don't know. I'm not
So the courts will decide.
And one of the luxuries we have of being more deliberate than, say, the state of New York. But we've seen what parts are not constitutional. And there's two aspects to this. First, reaching back and confiscating someone's weapons. This bill does not do that. It goes forward. In fact, everyone gets to keep what they have. The second aspect of it is what is a commonly used gun or magazine, and that was the ban was on 10 and not more than 10. So some feel that that will stand the test of constitutionality, but that's what the courts are for, and I think that's the brilliance of our system. You have an executive branch that proposes, a legislative branch that disposes, and the judiciary.
You talk about this as a more deliberate process.
Yes.
We took longer than New York did, clearly. But there are those lawmakers complaining, I got to see this multi-page document Wednesday morning. I'm expected to vote on it. Till 2:30 in the morning the next day. But
no, but we've had a number of public hearings. We've had more testimony and in-person testimony than the history of the state of Connecticut. 1,300.
Well, you heard arguments, but you didn't see that final.
But most of the language was what was discussed. In fact, not just by this committee, but also the Public Safety Committee of the legislature, the judiciary. So this has been thoroughly vetted. All of these issues were out there. Yes, we would love to have things earlier, and the Republicans have suggested those rules, but the vast majority of the Democrats precluded us from doing that. They do this with everything, including the state budget. Imagine 500 pages sometimes, or even 800 pages, just hours before you have to actually vote on something. That is part of a problem here in Connecticut. It's also a problem in Washington, D.C. as well.
And not to mention the midnight voting that takes place the last night of the session.
Well, and we also had very different experiences on the committees, because if you look at, each one of those working groups were vastly different in the sense that the way the gun working group worked, and because of the focus, it was a much different experience. I think, there was a lot more bipartisanship on the other two. If you look at the fact that the gun working group,
it wasn't as controversial.
Right, but also
mental health,
but the
school
process,
safety. Who's going to be against school safety?
He's right.
But
though,
the
process is different.
If you have to ask yourself why the Senate Majority Leader was chairing a working group, well beneath his pay grade. And the reason that was because there were a lot of agendas, a lot of politics, a lot of things being introduced into that process. And because that was a controversial part, that's the part that kind of ran amok a little bit. And I look at...
Would you have it another way?
Much different, yes. Much different. I think, listen, I came from corporate America, Air Force. In my experience, any kind of working group gets together, they solve issues, and they come up with some sort of recommendation. Exactly. We didn't do that. We had 2 meetings with all of us together, the beginning and the end. Mm-hmm. And I sat down with a document that I thought we had been negotiating in good faith with both sides, not necessarily together, but we've been negotiating. I was handed another list, and it basically said Democrat proposals, and it had everything under the sun. And then they started to try to say, well, there are consensus items in between. There are 16 we agree on, and they put both forward as if they were some sort of recommendation. And then that became what was negotiated. And by the way, we talked about the political part of it. Larry Cafaro, our minority leader, did a yeoman's job of it. He was under incredible pressure from inside, outside, and he was forced now to be just in a negotiation to make what would have been a bad bill even better. So he had to vote for it for that.
Dan is correct. It was a more bipartisan subcommittee. Ours did have its rocky road in the beginning, and it took a great deal of effort by my working behind the scenes with my chair on the House side, because quite frankly, when you're in the supermajority for a very long time, it's hard to share power, and sometimes it takes a great deal of work to do that.
I'm taking over right here for one more break, but we'll come back. School safety. Why would that be rocky? One would think, all right, you might not want guns, armed people, but why rocky? And we'll answer that question right after that. Stay with us. One more break. Just a few minutes left. School safety, rocky road at the beginning.
Yes.
Because?
Well, first we had to learn how to work together and share the committee responsibility. Secondarily, there were two very controversial issues that we took off the table right off the bat. Number one, it was cost and mandating towns to add personnel that would cost them going forward in the operating budget. Number two was something that came out in the national news, was arming teachers and staff. We thought about that. About 80 to 90% of all the testimony we got really opposed that idea, and we thought that it could cause problems because you need to be highly trained to be in an active shooter situation. So a staff person could inconceivably have collateral damage and put the safety of students at risk. We even went so far as to say if you hire a security guard and a security resource officer that's armed, they should be post-certified. In other words, they should have very current training because that situation can put young children at risk. So we took that off the table, and then we moved forward on the things that we did reach consensus on, very different from the experience that Representative Carter had with his.
Well, neither one of you were on the mental health committee, but action was taken there as well. A faster response to an incident with someone. Are you comfortable with that part of the bill?
I personally am not quite there yet. I understand that that's a big nut to crack. There's no question about it. In the time that we've had, though, there are things out there I think we've done a little more deeper, like maybe looking at the duty to act for practitioners. If you find somebody who is at risk of injury to themselves or others, those kinds of identification, I think we needed to go farther instead of just saying we're going to do it as a study. I think we deserved a little more meat in that part of the bill. But that's in no way am I saying that they didn't do a great job on their part of the subcommittee or the working group.
Are you comfortable with?
Actually, I'm not, Tom. I'm not comfortable at all. Most of the important issues were made into a study. And as people are heartened that this is the toughest gun law in the country, I disagree. I think the heart of the problem is exactly what you said. It's mental illness. And they become too politically correct without really going after the problem. The problem is our hospitals, Danbury Hospital, Norwalk Hospital, psychiatric units have severe mentally ill individuals that come forward and they have no place to put them. Fairfield Hills was a mental health institution in Newtown itself. It was shut down.
A huge campus.
I have a constituent in Richfield whose son was killed because one of their patients ended up in their apartment complex and burned the place down. They were supposed to have oversight. They were supposed to be taking their medications. That did not happen.
But see, that's the hard part of this too, because the day this happened, I was at the Danbury War Memorial and a Homeless Connect event, and they're talking about homelessness and the connection to the mental health. And part of the problem is being in one space to coordinate care. So when the school bus stops coming to somebody's school, like in this situation, and you've got this kid out there who's 20 years old, and who is really coordinating his care at that point?
Exactly.
And that's the problem we got to look at.
So the politically incorrect statement is there's a place for institutionalization for very few, very severely disabled individuals.
We've run out of time. I thank you so much. We've learned a lot from you. What we haven't learned is how we're going to pay for this, which is a big problem. We'll have to come back again and talk about that. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you
for joining us as well. Please stay tuned. The news continues.